Welcome to the March 9th Sandag EMP Working Group meeting. Before we jump into the meeting, I'll ask our working group leader, Kim, to confirm that we have a quorum. I think you just did that, right?
Yep, we do. Thank you.
Okay. So I'd like to update the members and public on our new process for both member and public comments. The primary members will be using their camera and we will take live public comments. Members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment or question, and then we can recognize you. Because this is the new process for all, I'm going to ask Kim Smith to go over the basic instructions for both working groups and members of the public to participate in the meeting. As always, we're changing the rules on you guys, so just to keep you on your toes. Kim, how are we going to do this?
So as noted on the cover page of our meeting, in addition to email comments, the public may also provide live comments during our meeting. In order to provide live comments, when there are public comments called for, when Leanne calls for them, on an item, you click on the raised hand icon in the Zoom in the control panel. It's on the top right of your screen. You'll be called on by the name you're registered with, and then you can provide your comments. There's no need to mute your microphone. We will be able to unmute that when you're called on. The instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed from the homepage of Sandag's website at www.sandag.org. All comments, whether emailed or live, will be made a part of today's meeting record. Back to you.
That sounds good. So let's get started with item number 1, which is approval of the January 12th, 2021 meeting minutes. Does anybody have a motion?
Motion.
Thanks, Candace.
Second.
Do I have a second? Jim, was that you?
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, do we have any public comments?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Do we have any member comments on the minutes?
And just to clarify, if members have comments, because you're now on panelist mode, you can just unmute yourself and make those comments. I don't see any hands, so I think
okay, no hands and no one's popping in. So, so since there's none, I'll ask him to begin the roll call for the vote, please.
Okay, this is the fun part. So I'll just call your name and either say yes or no or abstain. So County of San Diego, Leanne?
Yes.
Okay. Kristen Forberger, City of San Diego?
Yes.
Thank you. Roseanne Humphreys, City of Carlsbad?
Yes.
Okay. Is Cheryl Goddard here, City of Chula Vista? I think she's here. Let's see. Bruce or David Nagy, Caltrans?
Yes.
Thanks. David Mayer, CDFW?
Yes.
Susan Nguyen, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service?
Yes.
Lance Criley, U.S. Forest Service?
Yes.
Robert Fisher, USGS?
Yes.
Ann Harvey, San Diego Conservation Network? Ann, are you on?
I can unmute myself. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Trish Smith, the Nature Conservancy?
Trish is not here.
Oh, okay. Then Candace Woe, San Diego Foundation?
Yes.
Okay. And Jim, Alliance for Habitat Conservation?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
So we can move on. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I see Trish is on, but since I'm sharing my screen, I can't promote her. And since we're still in the minutes, I figured we probably should get her on and get her input.
Trish, yes or no on the minutes or abstain?
Yes,
Go
on the
ahead.
minutes.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll move on to item number 2, public and member comments.
How are you doing?
So I will ask members of the public who wish to offer public comment not related to a matter on today's agenda to please raise your hand at this time so we can call on you.
I don't see any hands raised at this time.
Okay. Next, any members, any comments from members of our group?
No. Well, if none of the members
Okay.
have, if none of the members have comments, I do have a couple of comments, Leanne. I just wanted to
Okay.
update the working group on the appointment of a new chair. We had hoped to have that appointment made by now, but we're still working with the Sandag board. So we're hoping by June, but Leanne's doing a great job. So thank you, Leanne. And then the second item is I wanted to introduce our new EMP intern, Lauren Lee. She is just joined us about 3 weeks ago now, and she's a senior at UC Davis. She'll be graduating this spring with a degree in environmental policy analysis and planning. So she will be helping out with future virtual or live EMP working groups. So welcome to the group, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. It's very nice to meet you all. Can't wait to work with you all.
Hi, Lauren. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the group. Kim, are there any comments from the public that need to be read into the record?
No, there are not.
Okay, so if there's no further comments, we'll move on to item number 4, which is the EMP ad hoc committee recommendations on proposed criteria for the 10th cycle of the land management grant call for projects. Susan Nguyen will be presenting the ad hoc committee's recommendations. Take it away, Susan.
Yeah, so we met as a group about a month and a half ago, and we reviewed the previous call for projects, and in particular the evaluation form and the points, how we would score the projects. We also spent a bit of time looking at the SDMMP gave us a presentation on sort of what the priorities would be for this next round, which in that part of the process will be presented at once we have the meeting for the applicants that might be applying. As far as the call for projects part of it, though, we really didn't make too many changes to the program. There was really two changes that we made. Probably the most significant is that we added a social equity component to the evaluation. And so for both programs, we have the shorter term, smaller projects, and then the longer form. So the first one is the threat reduction stewardship projects, which are 18-month, and then versus the long ones. But in both of them, we added a evaluation criteria to try and start to get at social equity. And so we had a really productive conversation about what that meant and how we might score that in the evaluation of the projects. And so you'll see new text that's been added. So we added a new criteria to address that, and then it's defined below with a footnote. So looking at how the projects might benefit disadvantaged communities, or it might increase access to parks and open space, higher quality, or it might employ, like if they're employing folks like the California Conservation Corps to do the work. And so we, anyway, there are several different ways that the project might be able to achieve those points. So that's by far the biggest new criteria that we've added. And I think this is consistent with some board direction that was taken kind of right before we met. And then the second change that we made was that we added sort of a bar so that projects need to score a minimum, receive a minimum score to be considered. And so 1 year we had we didn't have that in place, and we had some projects that really scored low, but because there was enough money, we still had to fund them. And so instead we decided to have a minimum criteria that you had to be met, you had to meet in order to be considered eligible. And if for some reason, if one of the categories came up short, then we could move the money from the short-term projects to the long-term bucket, because we've always had significantly more need than money available in the bigger bucket. And it's harder for us to predict on the short-term projects. And so again, we introduced this idea of a minimum criteria to be eligible. And if for some reason we didn't get enough projects applying for that funding that met the eligibility criteria, then that money will shift to the other bucket. And so you'll see that text highlighted on the screen right now. So really, those were the two major changes. Otherwise, it was a couple wordsmithing kind of cleanup, and then, like I said, the other part of it, which is what species or habitat types and things will be priority. SDMMP will provide more of that information, when they actually have the call for request for projects goes out. Did I miss anything, Kim?
No, I don't think so. I think just that the first category, the threats and stewardship is $800,000, and then the second category is 1.6. So it's a total of 2.4 million that we are going to award. So it's
right. So a little bigger than in previous years because we've missed a year. And anyone else on the committee, Jim or Candace or Robert?
No.
No, you covered everything.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, I definitely want to thank the subcommittee members for the hard work on this. We really appreciate you doing that. And now that we've heard the recommendations, we can open the floor to the working group members for any input anyone has.
And maybe we should
Go
just
ahead.
scroll down the schedule. At the bottom, there's the schedule, so people could see the kind of the anticipated timeline for this moving through the process.
Okay.
That would be helpful.
Oh, there you go, Courtney.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, the
Any
next
comments from members?
I'm trying to figure out how to raise my hand.
you're doing it, Dave. Perfect.
I just wanted to point
Yes.
out that one of the things I thought was really helpful when we were talking about this recently was there was a map showing where all the funding had been given over the last however many years. And it was really interesting, and kind of proud of the fact that it's been distributed very evenly across the county. That should help, I don't know, maybe negate any criticisms we might have had if we were favoring a particular part of the county.
Correct. And that map, Dave, just that map comes from, so once we award, or once we move forward with our recommendations, we have to do an in-house social equity analysis. So that map is usually produced after that, and it shows the distribution of the grant or the projects that we awarded versus, all the grant projects. So you're right, it was definitely dispersed throughout the county.
Kim, you had a comment that I cut you off on. What were you
That's okay.
thinking?
That's okay. Left me.
Does any other members have comments to add? Okay, well, I don't see any hands. Do you, Kim? Okay.
I mean, for members
Um,
of the public.
Yeah, so any public comments from the folks that are joining us?
I don't see any hands.
Okay, we've got a quiet group today. Okay. We don't need to vote
Yeah,
on this?
We do.
Kim?
So we do need a motion to recommend.
Okay. So could I get a motion to recommend the changes or?
I recommend we change them. I motion.
Okay, Susan
I
and
second.
Jim.
Trish Smith.
Okay, I think we got Jim down as second first, Trish. Thank you. So let's go ahead and call for the vote. Well, I guess we have.
No,
after we have
I need to go through and call for the vote. So
Yeah.
bear with me. So Leanne?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Kristen Forberger?
Yes.
Roseanne Humphreys?
Yes.
Thank you. Let's see. David Nagy?
Yes.
David Mayer?
Yes.
Susan Wynn?
Yes.
Lance Criley?
Yes.
Thank you. Robert Fisher?
Yes.
Ann Harvey? Ann, are you still on?
She is. She just made her thumbs.
Oh,
Oh,
perfect.
yes.
Let's see. Trish Smith?
Yes.
Candace?
Yes.
Jim Whalen?
Yes.
And then Stephanie Cervantes, I see you.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. It passes unanimously. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so on to number 5 on the agenda. Since we're moving forward with our 10th cycle of land management grants, we thought it would be great to do some of the highlights of the past grant projects that have recently closed out. Today, we have 4 separate presentations from various entities that have been successful in putting together EMP funds to use. First, I'd like to introduce Mark Berninger, I'm sorry, from the city of San Diego Parks and Recreation to highlight their San Diego thorn mint restoration project. Mark, are you ready?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Leanne.
Great.
Appreciate that. All right. Can everybody see that? Okay.
Yes.
Got it. All right. So thanks, everybody. First, I would like to thank, first of all, the Mission Trails Regional Park Foundation. I am presenting on behalf of them because they were awarded this grant for San Diego thorn mint restoration. So thank you very much to Jennifer Morrissey and the staff over there for allowing me to present about this. So off we go. So I'm going to be talking today about our thorn mint restoration project in Mission Trails. As we go, pardon me. And this is part of our, as part of our multi-species conservation program, and we have a rare plant monitoring program that we do in the city. What it is we visit every one of our rare plant sites that we've identified across the city and identify year over year what's happening there. Why we do it, we want to keep track of those things, and we want to make sure that we're staying on top of these rare and endangered species and understand how we can manage them better. How we do it? We do this for a number of different ways with management activities such as fencing or herbicide treatments or signage or any number of different things. And where we do it is all across the city. Here's a brief slide about where our rare plant monitoring locations are. As you see, there's a lot of them clustered around Mission Trails Regional Park there in the middle. There's a couple of the species that are here, the species that we monitor every year. in our rare plant monitoring program. And as part of that, you see the first one up there, the San Diego thornmint, Acanthaminta ilicifolia. And this is a map of mission trails and some of the areas that we see are rare plants and mission trails. And this really is about a success story. Obviously, we take success year by year here in San Diego, especially with drought and other impacts that we have across our open space parks. So this is about how we've taken a population of rare and endangered threatened plants and brought them back to a smaller degree. Still a lot of work to do, but we'll continue on that effort. So here's where we have thornmint across the city of San Diego, in 6 different locations. Unfortunately, most of them are not doing very well currently. And the one at Mission Trails Regional Park is one of those standouts that is doing quite well recently. So what did we do out at Mission Trails? We obviously partnered with the Mission Trails Park Foundation, and they had retained Recon Environmental as a contractor for this project. But we had begun weed treatments as early as 2015 in this specific location. And then in 2017, we were awarded a grant from the San Diego EMP Transnet Sandag group to improve and expand these areas and enhance and restore that habitat there. We also worked with San Diego Zoo, the native seed bank there, where we collected and bulk seed for our San Diego thornmint. And we spread that first seed. That first seed came back to to Recon in the city of San Diego in 2019 after it was collected, bulked, and banked by the San Diego Zoo. So Recon was obviously very instrumental in this project. They were on boots on the ground there for most of this the last 3 years, and they conducted weed control all the way up until that should be 2020 instead of 2021. I apologize. But we dispersed a lot of seeds into herbivory resistant cages to keep the little critters out from chowing down on all of our seedlings. And then throughout the project, we really continued a lot of weed control and maintenance to that site because it needs special attention, because the soils are very specialized there, clay soils. It takes a lot of effort. And we had to, in the past year, in 2020, we had a little bit of a setback, obviously, with COVID and things that were happening in our parks. But one of the other things, the challenges we dealt with was water. And we had a very wet early winter in 2019. But as it moved into 2020, we saw very, very little rain in that middle, February and March, and a lot of rain in April and May. And the plants had started to sprout already early in the season, and they were at an additional risk of failing because of that prolonged drought there in the middle of the winter. So we had worked with the Park Foundation and Sandag and Recon to kind of get a little bit of an extension to help these plants out a little bit more. So we gave some supplemental watering in March of this year, March of 2020. And you can see some of the early restoration on this site. You can see it's very, very much that clay thornmint soils where we produce these herbivory reduction cages. They don't work perfectly, but they keep quite a bit of the little bunnies and herbivores out of there to allow our seedlings to survive. Here's again some of our supplemental watering we did last year with crews from Recon. We had quite an explosion of plants outside of our herbivory cages this past year. So those were the ones that we really felt needed that additional watering to get them to a state where they could resist some of that herbivory. Here's a little slide about kind of where things were. You can see that big blue line on the outside. That was in 2001, where we had an extent of over about 300 plants there in that large extent of habitat. And then each subsequent year, you can see smaller and smaller groups. A lot of this was caused by non-native invasive grasses moving into the area. So we need to figure out a way to control those and restore this population to its kind of former glory, really. As you can see, here's some of the years where things weren't looking so well, but 2017, 2018, we had increases of those across the board. And then in 2019, we also included some additional areas there that we seeded. And so you can see they start showing up a little bit in our annual monitoring. Here is our results as far as when we actually looked at our monitoring point. So our monitoring point may not show the whole deal. And that is because our monitoring point, where we had traditionally found these plants, is actually outside of the area where we planted these. And they kind of have moved on their own and moved into more sustainable areas. And our monitoring points have stayed in the same places. But you can see there's quite a bit of bare ground there, some native vegetation, but we reduced our non-native vegetation down to about 4%, which was great compared to years previous. And that is really a key factor in the success of this project. And then we can see, here's our results again in April of 2020, where we see our maximum extent. So this is what a line around every single one of those plants that we found in that area. And that line extends greater outside of those herbivory cages and includes a lot of those plants that had volunteered on their own outside of those cages, as you can see. As you can see over on the left-hand side of there, you can see where the soils are cracking and look very, very good. And you can see the herbivory cages are working quite well, keeping those plants safe. But this is some of the data that we collected for our rare plant monitoring program. Our surveyor, our MSCP biologist and botanist, Sarah Allen, and our two interns went out there to look at stuff as we do every year. And this is where they counted 792 as of last year, 792 individual plants last year in April, or actually March 30th of 2020, which is great considering that in years previous, I'll show you in the next slide, we were very, very low. And why this is important is you can see our populations of San Diego thorn mint are very much in peril in a number of places. In so much that we only found thorn mint in 2 locations last year at all, and that was our Los Penasquitos site and our Mission Trail site. And a lot of this dark background out here this is rainfall from April of October of each year. It's kind of our rain year. You see there's a lot of correlation between rain and success of this plant. So we're continuing to monitor that, and what brings us pause, as we said last year, due to the timing of the rains. We got a lot of rain last year, but it was timed in such a way that it really hurt a lot of these plants that had already started to sprout in the early winter. This is our population for Mission Trails. As you can see in orange there, we have our non-native vegetation in the sampling plot, which it grows. You can see there's, in heavy rain years, there is a lot of plants, there's a lot of non-natives. And then in the lower rain years, there's a continued kind of correlation between non-native plants and rain and our native plants. But in about 2018, you see that there's a drop. We have low vegetation, low non-native vegetation, and low plant and low rain. But as we initiated this project and brought it online, you can see that those correlations start to leave each other. So we're having a greater amount of plants show up each year and a lower amount of non-native grasses, even in years when we have an elevated rainfall. I will say that the rainfall on this map is slightly skewed to a calculation, but we'll have that fixed in the next round. And so what are our next steps there for San Diego thorn mint? Obviously, long-term weed control is a huge issue at this spot. because of its location along several different trails that are in the area. We'll continue our annual monitoring for this site as well. And we do it multiple times a year. So we do our annual monitoring, which goes into our SDMMP IMG working group for rare plant monitoring, but we also try to get out to the site multiple times a year for management activities, whether it be weed control or non-native plant removals or whatever it may be. Check on the fencing and signage to make sure that everything's okay. But, and again, identifying long-term sustainable funding for these specific discrete project sites has been a challenge. Obviously, we continue to manage those out of our open space budget, and this site will essentially will continue to receive a lot of attention to make sure that we capitalize on those gains we've had in recent years. Another thing we've been lacking this year is we've missed our volunteers and our San Diego and our partners here in San Diego with the Native Plant Society and the Mission Trails Park Foundation. Last year in the last full year we had of volunteers, we had over 30,000 hours of volunteer effort in our open space parks and everything. And this year, in this past year, almost coming up on 1 year exactly, we've had almost zero. So you can imagine the impact that has open space wide. It's quite a bit. So that's why it's important, obviously, to engage our local communities and our public here to let them know how important these sites are and the role that our volunteers and the foundation play in protecting our rare and threatened plants. So here's a couple photos I took just the other day of these sites, and you can see there's quite a bit of thatch and things from native vegetation that's come up in there. And we'll be removing some of that thatch and allowing some of these plants to kind of have a little bit more breathing room. But things are starting to pop up. There's obviously some weeds and everything in there that we need to control. But as we're moving forward, we really hope to, that this becomes less and less each year, and that these sites essentially become self-sustaining, and the native plants actually will rebuff a lot of the non-native invaders. Just want to check my time here real quick. I wanted to have an opportunity to talk about a couple other projects that were funded by Sandag this year too, and not necessarily in conjunction with the Mission Trails Park Foundation, but with Sandag, and that's something that we had worked on internally with our staff. My staff, Jason Allen, who's one of our vernal pool biologists, actually had applied for these grants as a ranger with the city of San Diego, and he has been since promoted to vernal pool biologist for us. But he's worked on a couple really cool projects, and I'd just like to highlight them real quick that were also used Sandag funds. One was the Navajo and Choyas Radio Canyon Cactus Run Restoration Project, where we planted almost over 4,000 cholla and cactus cuttings, about 200 pounds of native seed. And we did non-native invasive species control. We removed over 1,000 pounds of non-native thatch to reduce the flashy fuels in those areas. And we're about $116 under budget. So even better. These are some of the before and afters here on the left. You can see our after, and the before you can see on the right. Lots of mustard and things. We cleared all that out and planted our plants there. And here's another. This is the one before is Navajo Canyon. This is Choyas Canyon, where we utilize this erosional alluvial fan to promote and plant a bunch of large cactus and cholla right along Market Street in central San Diego. The last project I would like to highlight real quick is our vernal pool habitat restoration in the Otay Mesa open space, where we put in about 2,400 native plants and over 1 mile of fencing to protect our sensitive habitats out there. 100 plus cactus and cholla cuttings. We also put about 100 pounds of native seed in the ground. Again, non-native control. blocked off some unused and restored some unused 4x4 trails that were out there. And we this winter in 2020, we had our first sighting of wintering burrowing owls in these spots, which hadn't been there for a couple of years now. And again, this project was about $16 under budget, but still under budget. So, and this is kind of what it looks like. This is on the border with the United States and Mexico here. Removed quite a bit of thatch and non-native vegetation and restored with a lot of our native plants and shrubs here to really kind of help this habitat regain its full capacity and functionality. And that's about it, really. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone involved, especially the Mission Trails Park Foundation. You know, they've been amazing partners through this, and working with Jennifer and the staff there has just been one of the great joys of being the natural resource manager with the city of San Diego. Also, my work with Sandag and our friends at the San Diego Wildlife Alliance, newly rebranded, and the Institute for Conservation Research there. Of course, our Mission Trails Ranger staff and volunteers in the past have had a huge opportunity to help us. And we hope that opportunity comes again here very, very soon. So I thank everyone for their time. And if you have any questions or concerns, I think we can chat about them now or have a question. I have a few minutes for questions, and then we can go from there. So I appreciate the time and thank you guys, everyone. Thank everyone for being here and supporting Sandag and this working group. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and I just want to, on behalf of the foundation, just want to say thank you so much for this grant. It's been amazing, the progress that's been made in working with the city and Recon, and you all, thank you so much. And there's a lot, more projects coming up, and we hope we can collaborate again.
Thanks, Mark. Really good presentation. I wish you continued success in those areas, and I think we're all missing the volunteers and are anxious for them to come back soon and be able to get out there and help all our jurisdictions on our goals. Does anybody in the working group have any questions for Mark or Jennifer?
Oh, Jim.
So this is forever, right? This activity to keep after the weeds.
Certainly. Yeah, this site is, given the location of it, it's great and super easy to get to, which makes it a really great candidate for restoration because it's visible, people see, people care about it, and it's not hard to get to. So our ranger staff have continued to monitor this area, and our biology staff and contractors have already been out this year to do some assessments for what's needed already. So yeah.
Second question is, what about volunteers? How are you going to get them back?
That is not my call, unfortunately. That's a call made by the city attorney's office. So as soon as the city attorney has deemed that we're able to have volunteers, I have been told that our open space volunteers are right at the top of that list for being allowed to come back.
Yeah, and we're going to be helping the city with volunteer recruitment effort. We need a lot more help. We've a lot of catch up and maintenance to be done. So, and I'm hoping that we can maybe partner with the CNPS for San Diego County and maybe recruit some volunteers and partner with them to help on projects like this.
Kim, do we have any other hands up?
Yeah, Trish.
Thanks. Great job, Mark. I had a question or two. Was the supplemental irrigation in March of 2020 for the whole treated area or just a subset? And if so, if it's a subset, experimental manner where you can evaluate the effectiveness of that measure to enhance success?
That's a great question, Trish. We initially had thought that we would just provide supplemental irrigation for those areas outside of the herbivory cages, but we ended up providing irrigation for everything. So there wasn't, so everything got irrigated last year. Yeah.
Great job.
Thanks, Trish. Kim, do we have anybody else with their hands up? Or do we have anybody from the public?
I don't see anyone from the public or any more panelists, so.
Okay.
All
Well,
right.
thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I'll stop sharing here. Kick it back to you guys. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Next up, we have Jennifer Price from the County of San Diego to highlight the work on the Ramona Grasslands Preserve, the Bullfrog Eradication Project.
Yes.
Jennifer, looks like you've got your presentation up. Take it away.
Great, thank you so much. Again, my name is Jennifer Price. I'm with the County of San Diego Department of Parks and Recreation. And today I will be discussing the Ramona Grasslands Preserve Bullfrog Eradication Project. And so this project was funded through the Sandag Transnet EMP Cycle 9 Threat Reduction Stewardship Grant. And this initially was an 18-month term project. Next. So Ramona Grasslands Preserve is located in northern San Diego County, east of Interstate 15, south of State Route 78, north of State Route 67, and west of downtown Ramona. Next. So Arroyo Toad, a federally endangered species, is found within the preserve. During 2016 monitoring surveys, adult and tadpole arroyo toads were observed within Santa Maria Creek, west of Rangeland Road, within the western portions of the preserve, as shown in this figure. Also, an individual southwestern pond turtle was also observed in 2016 in the western portion of the preserve. Adult and juvenile bullfrogs have been observed in Santa Maria Creek, west of Rangeland Road, and in the treatment ponds on the adjacent Ramona Municipal Water District property. And bullfrogs have been known to eat juvenile and adult arroyo toads and juvenile southwestern pond turtles. The presence of these bullfrogs reduces the chances of a viable population of arroyo toads and southwestern pond turtles within the preserve. Next. So in December 2018, we received the notice to proceed from Sandag, and in early January 2019, qualified herpetologists located bullfrogs and special status herptiles within the preserve and the adjacent Ramona Municipal Water District property. So County of San Diego Department of Parks and Recreation holds a biological open space easement over portions of the adjacent Ramona Municipal Water District property that allows us to perform invasive animal species treatment. We also coordinated with USGS regarding eradication methods, and USGS staff participated in early eradication efforts. So these are the locations of where arroyo toad, bullfrog, and two-striped garter snake were found. So we have the Ramona Grasslands Preserve Pond that's located, I know I'm pointing at the screen, no one can see me do that. So it's located in the western portion. I believe you can see the pond right there. Then we have Santa Maria Creek Pond. And then we also have the two treatment ponds within the Ramona Municipal Water District property. So that smaller pond there, and then the larger pond up to the north. Next. So our eradication surveys began in late January 2019 and continued approximately twice a month through October 2020. But then surveys were suspended in March 2020 in response to Governor Newsom's updated list of essential workers in relation to COVID-19. But then in April, we resumed eradication surveys as we determined this work was considered essential. And then we were contacted by Sandag regarding a 6-month extension. So we were able to extend the project from 18 to 24 months. So this is a figure showing the locations where the bullfrog eradication surveys were performed. So the green dot shows the preserved pond. And then of course we have Santa Maria Creek. Then the 2 treatment ponds within the Ramona Municipal Water District property. Next. So our removal methods included use of both gigs and seine netting. And nighttime surveys concentrated on the removal of adult bullfrogs, and daytime surveys were conducted to remove tadpoles and juveniles. Next. So in total, we removed more than 1,500 bullfrog adults, tadpoles, and juveniles, and that was within all the different project or areas that I noted before, within the pond on the preserve, within Santa Maria Creek, and within the Ramona Municipal Water District treatment ponds. Next. So the bullfrog eradication efforts were performed through 2 Arroyo Toad breeding seasons. In each year, 2019 and 2020, adult Arroyo Toads were observed calling from portions of Santa Maria Creek. Also in each year, Arroyo Toad toadlets were observed within the creek. We had a pretty much stable population of Arroyo Toads through both years, probably 40 to 50 individuals. On-site suitable habitat for Arroyo Toad is comprised of open sandy areas where low-flowing portions of Santa Maria Creek occurs, and estivation areas occur adjacent to the creek and include large sandy areas with low overall vegetative cover. And so the eradication efforts hopefully also improved habitat for southwestern pond turtle, as that was one of our objectives. So next. So these are just some photographs of the species that benefited from the bullfrog eradication. We have juvenile and adult Arroyo Toads, and then USGS was kind enough to supply me with a southwestern pond turtle photograph. And so we will continue management of bullfrogs through the Preserve Resource Management Plan and our targeted monitoring plan. And there's recommendations that we perform annual bullfrog eradication in February and March of each year before the Arroyo Toad breeding season. And that is it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Any questions?
Yeah, any questions from the group?
I have a question, or I have a handful of questions, but
Oh gosh, Robert, okay.
Hey, no, that was great. On the removal, what you might want to do, or we can talk about this offline, is focus on egg mass surveys early in the year, because we really want to break that life cycle. And so we broke the life cycle now at Rancho Hamul, and it's really staying on that egg mass survey, so that you're depleting the adults, but then you're also reducing recruitment. And so why did you not have any information for the non-vegetated pond, which on aerial imagery looks like it's vegetated now?
So I don't know if we can go backwards. So, you know, we did perform the eradication surveys, you know, within that unvegetated pond. So
you did, okay.
And the vegetated. Sorry, yes. There's bullfrogs there. You know, we removed from, you know, both of those treatment ponds. It wasn't just the vegetated pond. We definitely looked at both ponds. But, you know, it's pretty dangerous, you know, to enter those ponds, you know, because it is effluent. So, you know, the consultant we were working with, he was like, you know, he didn't want to go too deep into that effluent pond. So, you know, it's working, you know, I think with the Ramona Municipal Water District a bit more, you know, definitely working on coordination, because it's going to take a while to get those bullfrogs under control. I understand that it's not just one shot and that's it, or 1 year, 2 years.
Great. Oh, that's helpful. And sorry, one last question. Is the Ramona Grasslands Preserve Pond, is that never dries down?
It does.
Oh, it
It
does. Okay.
does, yeah. And of course, if there's drought conditions, there are definitely dry periods for the pond. So yes, I do understand, that we could, try to get the bullfrogs, that are, I don't know if they're escaping, when it dries, or they start burrowing down into the dirt. So that's something to think about if we can concentrate on that pond when it dries out for bullfrog removal.
Great. Well, thanks.
I got a question. So the bullfrogs do the same things that, say, spadefoot toads do? They hide underground while it's dry, or are they out of luck if it's?
No, they'll move. Usually they'll go somewhere, and they can go up to 5 miles. So that's why you've got to manage at the landscape scale, because they'll move if it starts to dry down, less than what the spadefoots will hunker down, but these guys they'll just go overland and find the nearby water.
The second question, is it easy to find them so you can poke them? I mean,
yeah, so during the night, they would spotlight, definitely, seeing their eyes, and then they would go after them. Yeah, I was a little surprised that, the number of bullfrogs removed wasn't higher, but, there was only, I think, maybe one person out there or two people at a time. Maybe if we can get more staff out there, to help out with eradication, and people were kind of excited to go out there and remove bullfrogs, which was nice to hear.
5 14-year-old boys, you get it covered. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
Jennifer, were there crayfish or other species of frogs, non-native frogs out there that were part of what you guys collected?
So, we just concentrated on bullfrogs this time. I do understand there's some other invasive animals that are out there. I believe there is some crayfish out there too. Yeah, I knew there would be a question about this. That's something to think about too, if we can remove other invasive animal species out there, because I know they do impact sensitive amphibians.
So would the methods be different then? Is that why you weren't collecting them? Or
yeah, with the gigging, I think that, more for the bullfrogs. Seine netting, I could check with our consultant if they were catching anything else, at the same time, but they didn't report that to me. But I can check with them. But I think I would, talk with USGS, a little bit more, because they have a lot of experience with removing invasive animals, especially in riparian areas.
We've really had to use shooting as a technique, because we have not. That's the only way we've been able to get successful is having firearms as part of the toolbox.
So Robert, would then, for that one deeper pond on the water district land where it's too deep to really wade across with a seine, would the egg masses, like, because they float?
Yeah, they'll still be on you can see them. You can get them from the shoreline. And we use boats. We use kayaks and stuff, and do the shooting from kayaks. And so they might be able to do that and not touch the water, so much, by being on those. But I just think the bigger issue is removing that water source, or covering those ponds, just to remove them as a future problem in that landscape, if it's possible, like as a way to, if they don't need to be there, like they're not serving a wildlife value, and potentially they're have diseases that are going to get to birds and other things, and then like if they could be removed from that landscape, that would be super helpful for the Arroyo Toad recovery in that system. But that's not a county issue. That's a water district issue or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that pond, Jennifer, though, in your guys's under the easement area? That bigger pond?
Yes, yes, those two treatment ponds are within our easement. So, you know, I mean, yeah, I just like Robert said, I don't know if the county can direct the Ramona Municipal Water District to move their ponds, you know, to change their whole system. But it's just, you know, working with them, coordinating, you know, that's, I think, the best we can do at this moment.
And it might be that not even just removing them, but letting them dry down in January and just breaking that life cycle of the frogs. If they could do that seasonally, that might really change the whole dynamics and really drive their extirpation really quickly.
Yeah, that's true.
No, great presentation. That was good. And yours, Mark, too, was great.
Thanks, Robert. Yes, Jennifer, thanks for sharing that. Continued success on that. We'd all like to see that. I think I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to thank Jennifer, and we're going to go ahead and we'll now hear from Sarah Hutmucker on the Boulder Creek Townsend Big-Eared Bat Project. Sarah, I'm sorry if I butchered your last name.
That's okay, Hutmucker, no problem.
Oh, okay, great.
And thanks for having us. So I'm Sarah Hutmucker. I'm the Chief Associate Director of the San Diego River Park Foundation, and we had a project to work on protecting some occurrences of the Townsend's big-eared bat that occurred on our Boulder Creek preserve. Go ahead to the next slide. So just for context, Boulder Creek is one of the upper tributaries of the San Diego River that flows between Lake Cuyamaca and the San Diego River through a lot of Forest Service property, but as well as some private property. And we have a preserve that we purchased in 2011 and 2012 in that area that is right at the location where Boulder Creek crosses Boulder Creek Road. So I'm going to go to the next slide. I can show you a little zoomed in picture. So our property, both of those two bubbles that are on the map occur on our property. So we have property on the east side of the road, which is on the right of this screen, about 11 acres. And then we've got a smaller parcel that's on the downstream side of the road. Most of our interpretive area is on the western side of the preserve, but we do have an old mine that is from the late 1800s that was on the property. And in this picture, this is just an old, Google Earth image. You can actually kind of see the dirt trail that is disturbed from the road to the mine. The mine was used as a geocache location, and it's known to the public, although it's not like super well trafficked. We have seen a lot of evidence that people are checking it out from time to time. The creek itself is a popular swimming hole, and Three Sisters Trailhead is just about 2 miles from this preserve. So there's a lot of traffic for the backcountry. So it's a really prime location for doing a little bit of this work. Let's go to the next slide. In 2016, we were out with some volunteers and spotted these little guys up in the mine, and did a little bit more research because there's also a mine further upstream on Boulder Creek that is gated. And we started to see if we could learn a little bit more about what we needed to do to protect this mine entrance. Townsend's big-eared bats, as you know, are very susceptible to disturbance. So we had Drew Stokes come out and help give us some advice, which led to this project. So this occurrence was recorded. I think if you click once, Courtney, you'll see just a little screenshot. We recorded it on the SDMMP and got going on this application. So next slide, please. Our goal was really to increase the suitability of that roosting habitat in the mine. And part of that was by installing a gate at the entrance to control access for humans, but permit access for mammals and bats and other small things. These are the six tasks that we worked on, doing a pre-implementation monitoring with Drew Stokes from the Natural History Museum. We did install the mine gate and then did some erosion control. We bought different types of bat monitoring equipment so that we can continue to monitor this occurrence. and hired Recon to do an assessment of the preserve so that we could get some management recommendations on board with this bat in particular. The organization had been doing restoration at this site for quite some time, but not specific to management of bat habitat. So this was a new thing for us. And then of course, we want to be able to have appropriate education and interpretation about this species, even if we were excluding the public from the actual habitat itself. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go through each of those tasks real quick. That first monitoring report, we came up, Drew confirmed what we had suspected, that this was an opportunistic roost at this time, but that it had potential to serve as a maternity roost. And so we started to move forward on those different assessments. He both did passive acoustic monitoring and documented several bat species, including the Townsends, and he observed individuals in the mine itself on those site visits, as well as some Monterey salamanders and coast newts as well. So we got lots of cool stuff happening in that mine. Next slide, please. So you can kind of see before, it was a very slippery, eroded slope going down into the entrance of the mine. Just in the years that we owned the property, we could see the opening closing by, it had closed about 12 inches just in the couple years that we'd owned the property. Myself, having been in there, it's just really easy if a human is trying to climb into that mine that you're disturbing a lot of loose soil. Inside the mine, you can stand up. You can kind of see in that blurry picture the head clearance that we got in there. So we hired a contractor that specializes in these kind of mine exclusion gates to install this mine. It has a gate, like special lock that allows us to open it for future monitoring, but beyond that, it's going to be closed to people. Let's see. Yeah, I think next slide. During the course of the installation, and of course, just with ongoing erosion, we decided to wait till after the gate was installed, of course, but then we had Recon come out and do some erosion control measures, both at the gate itself and also at the road access to the property. There was kind of a visible trail that was established by people who had just been previous trespassers, but also that's where the welder parked for the purposes of installing the mine gate. So the Recon also did some erosion control just through seeding and invasive removal at that location to disguise the entrance a little bit and also make up for any incidental erosion that we'd done during the mine gate installation. All right, next. We also did bat monitoring through this project. We actually bought two different types of monitors. So one is the Anabat Swift, which is what Natural History Museum uses. It has both a zero crossing mode that kind of collects instances of, and as well as a full spectrum mode that does like more data. However, it's very scientific and not as interpretive, that has less interpretive value. So we also bought this inexpensive version called an Echometer Touch 2. And this device that Jen's holding is just a real small little microphone that plugs into like an iPad or a smartphone. And it pairs with a software that this manufacturer has that does some sort of preliminary species ID live while you're recording the acoustic data. So it's a great interpretive tool with a little bit less scientific value. So for this project, we wanted to do both options. So the next slide, I'll show you on the next slide that there's a little bit of an example of what the two are, how they specialize. So what we're looking at here is one of the full spectrum mode graphs from the Anabat Swift. And this is a Mexican free-tailed bat, usually has more harmonics, but this was a really close pass. So, but what I want to play in addition, if you guys have your sound on, is the recording that comes through on the Touch 2 Pro so that you can kind of hear, if you're like a kid or a layman, it's really cool to get to hear the bat sound. Go ahead, Courtney. So it slows down the frequency so that humans can hear it. This chart that we're looking at is actually about a second. I think it's just over a second of recording. So the calls are usually happening at such a fast pace and also at a frequency that we can't hear. So the two tools together are actually really cool for us to be able to tell what we're doing. I should say that recording you listen to and the recording you're seeing are not the same recording, and they're just examples of each. So this is the results of the acoustic monitoring. We did 3 deployments with our monitoring equipment. The first one was the full spectrum recording. That's that column that says full spectrum at the top. That was done over a 4-day period in 2019. And then after that, we did a 0 crossing recordings, which means we have these data. The 2 data points on the right are both 0 crossing, and the full spectrum is a little bit different, which just kind of explains why the numbers don't totally match up. But all these species were recorded. The 3 at the bottom are ones that are suspected identification but not confirmed. Drew Stokes from the Natural History Museum reviewed all of these recordings as part of our contract. And the ones that are highlighted in blue are all species of special concern. Pallid bats and the Townsends are both on the SLSO list for SWMP. All right. Oh, I have some pictures. These are the these are the cute little bat friends that are the 4 that are the species of concern. Next slide. So finally, for the preserve assessment, we were documenting any threats on that property. In particular, we had noticed in our previous restoration that we had a pretty bad infestation of the gold-spotted oak borer and had previously done some insecticide treatment for some of the signature trees on that property. I wanted to make sure that we got a good recommendation about whether or not that could impact the bats, both negatively in the use of the insecticide or positively by protecting the trees, kind of getting a little bit of advice from the recon about that. They found that the western portion of the preserve, if you can remember from that aerial shot a while ago, which was very vegetated, lots of oak woodland, was highly suitable for bat habitat. It had ponded water even in late summer. They did their assessment in September, I believe, and there was still standing water on that property. So they felt that that was an especially important part of the property. However, the canopy on the eastern part of the property had a lot poorer canopy coverage. It burned in the fires, in the 2007, and some of the, I may have misspoken. It might be the 2003 fires, but burned some decades ago and has not recovered to the extent that it's able to keep the creek shaded and wet through the summer. There were some dead and dying trees that they recommended we remove immediately just because of how the gold-spotted oak borer spreads, that they tend to have like brood trees that get highly infested. And if we can control those trees, we might prevent the spread. But the majority of the trees faced pretty minor infestation, so we should just continue to monitor for further treatment. Next slide, please. In general, the issues that they highlighted is we've got some non-native plants that we should consider doing some control. We have a lot of cattle encroachment. These are all pictures of cattle from our wildlife cameras that we've got up there. So they're, causing a lot of ground disturbance, certainly a herbivory of the native plants, and are limiting some of the restoration efforts that we've previously done, particularly on that eastern portion of the property. There are not currently fences, and these are not allowed cattle. It's just a historically grazed area. Next slide, please. So as part of our education effort, we had intended to do some on-site education activities with volunteers and visitors, which obviously was interrupted by COVID. But we did decide to still stick with our education plans, and instead we did some of it through virtual demonstrations. So we did do a monitoring demonstration that we sent out on our e-news list, and we shared on our website. And then we've added a youth education activity that is part of our distance learning platform that the organization has put together during COVID. And then of course we have an interpretive sign that is, some distance away from the actual mine itself, but helps to educate the public about the value of that habitat area. Next slide. So next, we are going to be continuing to monitor for threats and sensitive species along the creek. We've got headwaters assessments actually coming up in April. We are going to continue the acoustic monitoring. Now that we have that monitoring device, we're going to deploy it again and continue to monitor that. And Drew has graciously offered to help us do some data analysis, even though our contract is over. We plan to further document any other SO and SL species, as well as any other species of concern through that monitoring effort, particularly with the pallid bat that we caught a couple of recordings of, and the newt that we've documented in the creek as well. The oak borer obviously threatens all oak dominant habitat in the whole forest. So we've been working with partners, with NRCS, the Forest Service, with state parks about kind of best management practices. And our hope is that we can have a management plan for those mature trees that show signs of infection, so that we can protect some of those most critical species or trees for creek protection. It's pretty expensive to drop the trees and also to treat the trees. So that's definitely something we're going to have to look for additional funding for, but we've started to try to look for that funding. And then of course, it sounds like there's a lot of potential for improving habitat suitability upstream of the project with reforestation and cattle exclusion. So we're also looking at opportunities, whether it would make sense for us to have some cattle exclusion efforts, fencing and that kind of thing, to permit wildlife and exclude livestock. Next slide. I think that's it. So I'm available for questions if any of you have any.
Does anybody have any questions for Sarah?
I see Trish has a raised hand.
Yeah, Trish,
Hello.
Go ahead.
Great presentation. And I think the really great thing about this particular one is you show the multi-dimensions of the SDMMP program: habitat assessment, threats assessment, management actions informed by.
Thank you. Trish, I'm not sure if you broke up or if that was the end of your statement, but I heard the praise part, and that was great.
I heard the compliment. Yeah. I don't know if you had a question or not.
Nope, no question, just a comment.
Okay, well, thank you.
Great job.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah. We're lucky that we have a lot of really awesome volunteers to help us make these projects happen. And during COVID, we did temporarily shut down our volunteer programs for about 3 months, but we resumed with some really strict COVID protocols and strict limitations and training for the volunteers that we had. So we did take Sandag up on the extension to give us a little bit more wiggle room to get the mine gate installed after the end of fire season, but so that we didn't have to have welders during a red flag day. But at the same time, it was really helpful to have the volunteers that were able to kind of keep all this stuff going.
Lance, do you have a question?
Question / comment. Hi, Sarah. This is Lance from the Forest Service.
Hey, Lance.
So
I know we've talked to you about those cattle.
Yeah. So first off, with the cattle, it's just like one swing gate on your neighbor's property.
Yeah.
That's all it is. So if we can figure that out. And then just on the GSOB, I was curious who assessed those trees, because like our standard advice is, if it's a heavy infestation, the tree is walking dead, it's done.
Right.
If it's a light infestation, that's what you treat.
Right.
Or no infestation is what you treat. So I was just curious about that.
So we had Recon do the assessment for this project, but we had some previous funding through Proposition 84 in one of the earlier rounds. And during that project, we dropped, I want to say 8 mature trees that were dead and dying, that were just brood trees. And they treated, I think, 30-ish kind of healthy but infected trees. And there's a lot more trees on that property, so they had kind of prioritized at that time. And yeah, Recon said that there are a few that since that time have become in that time to drop them category. But that previous project was $30,000 worth of tree work, so it's a big project and kind of beyond the scope of a lot of our volunteers just with those mature trees. But we've also worked, this property or this preserve is part of our Eagle Peak Preserve Conservation Area. And we did do a project with NRCS to kind of advise on like best management practices through their EQIP program. So we've done a couple of other like consultations with everybody. I mean, it's not a unique problem. Everybody in the forest is dealing with this. So trying to learn from others too.
Yeah. No, I think you could, the spraying has to be annual. And it can be a lot cheaper than that, but yeah, the taking trees down is expensive.
Yeah.
I had a quick question.
Yes.
The entry of the mine seems like it's closing really. I mean, I saw you were stabilizing. Do you have a projection on, like, are you guys going to have to go in there and do some harder work eventually to keep that open, or is there like a certain depth when all of a sudden, the bats stop using it and it stops becoming viable?
So that was one of the questions that we had. I originally thought that the mine was eroding. I was seeing erosion from above that was contributing to the kind of sediment buildup. But it sounds like from what Recon and the Natural History Museum are advising, that they think that it's mostly coming from illegal access to the mine, causing erosion that's sliding down from, when people slide on their butts into the entrance to the mine, they're taking with them a whole lot of the soil, and that the soil itself just is not vegetated because of all the disturbance. So we're hoping that between the erosion control effort and the fact that we're kind of removing the attractive nuisance of trespass, that we might be able to control that closing, slow it down quite a bit. So they determined they did not need at that time to do any of the erosion control above the entrance of the mine, that slope was pretty stable. It was really just the slope kind of leading toward the entrance. So I guess the short answer is we're going to continue to monitor it and see. Now that we have the gate itself, it's a lot easier to mark how big the entrance is. And we'll be able to kind of see it happening if it looks like it is continuing to close. But we don't think that that's right on the horizon.
Great, thanks.
Great. Well, thank you, Sarah, for that presentation. Hope to see continued success there. It looks like the numbers are really, really going up after the gate was installed.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so last but not least, we have Heather Cramp from the Port of San Diego to present on the Threatened and Endangered Species Stewardship at D Street Fill Project. Heather, are you ready? Please go ahead.
I am ready. Thank you, Leanne.
Great.
So good afternoon. As Leanne said, my name is Heather Cramp. I'm an environmental specialist with the Port of San Diego, and I manage the nesting site for endangered California least terns at the D Street Fill. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the program and the 2019 and 2020 nesting seasons, which were funded by the Environmental Mitigation Program. So next slide, please. Most of you are probably familiar with the port, but I'll give you a really quick background for those who aren't. We're a public benefit agency established in 1962. We're entrusted with protecting and managing the tidelands in and around San Diego Bay in a manner that promotes navigation, commerce, fisheries, recreation, and environmental stewardship. We have 5 member cities, and our jurisdiction covers approximately 34 miles of waterfront, including both coastal and submerged tidelands. Next slide, please. So I'd like to introduce you to 2 bird species found within San Diego Bay, the first of which is the California least tern. Least terns are federally endangered birds that migrate from South America and Latin America up to Baja and Southern and Central California during their breeding period. They're the smallest of the tern species, and they nest on sandy shorelines that are clear of vegetation. Loss of habitat and human disturbance have caused the species to become critically endangered by the 1970s. And the breeding population was estimated at fewer than 300 pairs. So they were federally listed under the Endangered Species Act, and with that came habitat restoration, predator control, and population monitoring efforts that have helped to restore the population to roughly 2,200 breeding pairs today. Next slide, please. The second bird I'd like to introduce is the western snowy plover. They're small shorebirds, and they're found from Baja California, Mexico, up to the state of Washington. Similar to least terns, they nest on sandy beaches, and they have been impacted by habitat loss and human disturbance as well. They're listed as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. Next slide, please. So now I'll tell you a little bit about the nesting site we manage for the least terns and the snowy plovers at the D Street Fill. D Street Fill is located just south of the Sweetwater River Channel in Chula Vista. The port and the San Diego Bay National Wildlife Refuge jointly manage the site. And importantly, D Street Fill has consistently been San Diego's largest least tern nesting site. Historically, the site was wetland habitat, and then in around 1969, it was filled in with dredge spoils from nearby development projects, primarily the 5 freeway. Fortunately, these spoils simulate coastal beach and dune habitat, which the terns and the plovers began to use as a nesting site when they were pushed out of their native habitat due to urbanization. So from here on, my presentation is going to primarily focus on least terns because they currently nest at D Street right now, and plovers do not. The plovers have nested at D Street in the past, and plover populations are doing pretty well in San Diego. So we continue to manage the site for plovers and least terns because it's pretty much the same type of management. And we're hoping that the plovers will come back in the near future. Next slide, please. So we have 4 main management goals at D Street. The first is invasive species management. Invasive plants can quickly cover the sand where the terns nest, so it needs to be handled on an annual basis. The second goal is site preparation. So that means removing the vegetation at the site, which is primarily invasive, before the birds begin arriving in April. So this site preparation usually occurs in around March this time of year. The third goal is biological monitoring. So we have dedicated biologists that have the appropriate permits to monitor and ban an endangered species, and they collect data during the nesting season, and then they report that back so we can assess their reproductive success. And the fourth goal is probably one of the most important, and that is predator control. So least terns nest directly on the ground and in the open, so they're particularly susceptible to land-based predators. Mostly coyotes, feral cats, rats, skunks, opossums, ground squirrels, and even ants. And they're also really susceptible to avian predators, so hawks, crows, and ravens. Next slide, please. We usually host volunteer events at D Street twice a year when there's not a pandemic. And these volunteer events focus on removing invasive plants and picking up trash along the shoreline. We often partner with the Living Coast Discovery Center and the National Wildlife Refuge and I Love a Clean San Diego on these events. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'll talk about the Environmental Mitigation Program grant the port received to manage the nesting site. We received a $75,000 grant in 2018, and these funds were used to manage the 2019 nesting season as well as the site preparation for the 2020 nesting season. Next slide, please. So in 2019, the site preparation at D Street began in early February. Our biologists walked the site and they put out pin flags where rare native plants and other native bird nests are located. And this is done to protect the limited amount of native wildlife present, so it won't be removed during the site preparation activities. Next, we use a mechanical scraper to remove the invasive vegetation across the site. So in this slide, you can see in the pictures on the right, the top one is what the site looks like before. Those plants are almost exclusively invasive Bermuda grass. And then in the after photo, you can see it's pretty bare. We take out all of that. And this provides that open sandy habitat that is ideally what the terns are looking for. So timing of the vegetation removal can be a bit tricky because we need to remove it really just before the birds arrive, but also dodging the winter rains. If we remove it too early, it will grow back during the nesting season and can cause issues later on with the chicks. Next slide, please. So after the site preparation, biologists will put out these wooden decoys. They're actually really nice and they're hand painted, and we put them out to encourage the birds to land and nest. It's probably a little bit confusing for the terns to sort of realize that these nesting birds aren't really real, but they don't seem to mind too much, and we think the decoys work and they don't have a negative impact on the birds, so we've continued to put them out each year. And then biologists will also place terracotta roofing tiles across the site in a grid pattern, and this will help them locate nests throughout the season so they can go back and check on them and then map the nests at the end of the season. And the biologists will monitor the site, usually starting once a week as the birds arrive, and then that'll ramp up to several times or several times a day when the nesting season is in full swing. Next slide, please. So biologists collect data on the number of nests, the number of eggs, and abandoned eggs. So in the photo on the left is, that's a least tern nest. They basically just scratch a little divot in the sand, and sometimes they'll decorate it with shell fragments. In the middle photo is a couple of eggs in the nest. They lay light brown, grayish eggs with these darker speckles on them, and that helps them blend into the sand. In the picture on the right, you can see an egg and it has a black marker line on the middle of it. And biologists will do that. They'll mark eggs like that to see if the parents are returning to the nest, because they'll rotate the egg for good incubation. So if the egg isn't rotated when the biologist returns, then they know that that nest has likely been abandoned. Next slide, please. So this is the cute part of the presentation. After about 20 days, the eggs begin hatching, and these little fluffy balls are the least tern chicks. They're mottled and sandy colored so they can blend in with their surroundings. And that is their only defense against predators, to not be seen. After a few days, they are strong enough to move away from the nest, and they will find shelter when their parents are gone. Shelter from predators, and sometimes shelter from the heat if it gets too hot. So in the picture on the right, those chicks are actually using one of those terracotta roofing tiles that the biologists put out to help map the site. Those have a beneficial dual purpose where they can be used as shelter by the chicks. And these pictures sort of really show how important the site preparation is for these little birds. The chicks can't move through vegetation, they're just too small. And they have markings that help them blend in with the sand. But because they're camouflaged, they're also hard to see by people. So they're really susceptible to human disturbance. And it'd be very easy for the public to miss these nests and sort of walk right over them. Next slide, please. So the biologists will also weigh the chicks and measure their wing length. And this helps them know if the chicks are healthy and if they're getting enough food from their parents, and the wing length specifically helps determine how old they are. Nearly all the chicks are banded on their leg with a little metal identification tag, and the tag helps biologists track the population into the future. Terns can live over 24 years, so being able to track individual birds from year to year is important for assessing the species' reproductive success and population changes over time. Next slide, please. We also conducted predator control efforts in 2019, which is absolutely crucial to the tern's survival. The port and the National Wildlife Refuge contract with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Animal Plant Health Inspection Services, Wildlife Services, to manage predators because there are several federal and state permits required to trap and or remove predators. A single predator can eliminate an entire colony in a single day, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So without active predator management, least tern adults and offspring at the D Street fill would likely be eliminated in a single breeding season. So on this slide, you can see a list of all the predators removed during the 2019 nesting season. And despite these efforts, we still lost significant amount of eggs and chicks to predators, which I'll talk about next. Next slide, please. So how did the 2019 nesting season go? We were successful with preparing the site and we timed the vegetation removal pretty accurately. In total, our biologists estimate we had 104 nests and about 12 chicks survived to adulthood. And this may seem like a small number, but it's pretty average compared to previous years. And remember, these nests, eggs, and chicks are really exposed, so a low survival rate is not unexpected. And this is why the predator control is so important. At the end of the nesting season, which is at the end of August, we mapped all the nests and we can use these data for future site preparation and management efforts. Next slide, please. We also held 2 volunteer events in 2019, Coastal Cleanup Day in September, and we did an invasive plant removal and beach cleanup effort in October. D Streets it's not that easy to get to by the public, so we were able to shuttle people over for Coastal Cleanup Day. And the public really enjoys knowing that they're not only cleaning up the beach, but they're helping the terns as well. Most of them have no idea that the nesting site is there. We had an additional event planned for early 2020, but it was canceled due to COVID. Next slide, please. And quickly, I'll mention that we used remaining grant funds for an herbicide treatment and site preparation for the 2020 nesting season. The invasive Bermuda grass has become really persistent, and I think the vegetation removal is actually sort of spreading it, unfortunately. So we tried an herbicide treatment in March 2020, but it also rained a lot that spring, and basically the site kind of turned into a bit of a lake. So we had to delay treatment until pretty close to the start of the nesting season, and it wasn't as effective as we hoped. So we're going to try applying an herbicide treatment again this year and see if we can sort of make a bigger dent on the invasive Bermuda grass. And then our biologists also prepped the site by flagging native plants and putting out the roofing tiles. Next slide, please. So that concludes my update for the 2019 nesting season and the 2020 site preparation, which were both funded by the Transnet EMP grant. I'll mention that the 2020 nesting season was not as successful as 2019. In May last year, all the eggs and chicks of the site were taken out by a pair of ravens over a period of a few days. Ravens they're really smart birds and they're hard to remove. And our predator control guys gave a really great effort. But fortunately, it was early in the season, so most birds actually moved to another nesting site managed by the airport at the Chula Vista Wildlife Reserve, and they re-nested there, and there were successful fledglings at that site. So it wasn't a complete loss for the 2020 season. And I think, again, it highlights how important site management and predator control is. And how crucial a survival of even like a handful of chicks is for the species. So we'll continue to adaptively manage the nesting site at D Street. We're hoping to get better control over the invasive species and improve our predator control efforts. We'd also like to do some targeted education outreach, specifically to kayakers in the area, which sometimes will land on the beach and disturb the birds because they don't realize that it's closed or a protected area. Next slide, please. So with that, I'd like to thank the EMP Working Group for your support of lease term management program at the D Street Phil. I really admire these birds. They're an important part of our ecosystem, and I think we're really lucky to have them in San Diego Bay. So again, your support is greatly appreciated and much needed by the Terns, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Heather. Let's see, we have, do we have any members that have questions or comments?
I have several, but I can wait if somebody else wants to go first.
I don't see any other hands up, Robert, so go ahead.
I have a couple questions. One is, when you were showing it flooded, was that the core of the parcel that was flooding? And is that, so should we be thinking about something more adaptive for sea level rise to maintain that site?
Yes, I do think sea level rise, I think it will probably not be within the next 10 to 15 years or so, but I think, yes, further down the line, sea level rise is going to be an issue at that site. The dredge spoils are fairly high, but there is some erosion, and the scraping that we do to remove the vegetation also removes a little bit of that top layer. So, several factors influencing that. But it has been proposed that we add more dredge spoils on top of the site. So that is a possibility in the future, as long as we would have to coordinate that closely with the National Wildlife Refuge.
And then have you guys visioned out any more sustainable way of managing the site long term, or is it going to be always this kind of management? Because the scraping really bothers me, and it just seems like that getting to some sustainable habitat would be really an important goal to invest in for us.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. It is not an ideal site or an ideal habitat for the least terns. I think we're fortunate that they actually moved there because I think most nesting sites in San Diego are lost. And the process that we're doing now to manage the site is it's labor intensive and it's a bit cost intensive, and it's the payoff for it is lower, especially in Southern California, where least terns have not been doing as well as sort of Central California, and in Baja they've been doing a bit better. I think, yeah, long term there should be a better management strategy for this site where it is a bit more self-sustained, or we need to do more restoration in other areas around San Diego where they can return to, previous habitat. But I think, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Great, thanks.
Okay,
Ooh,
thanks,
we
Heather.
have-
Let's see if we have any. Yeah, Kim.
I had Sandy Visman. She's one of our attendees. She had her hand up, so I'll see if she still has a question here. Oh. Sandy, can you hear us, or maybe you might want to try to ask?
There you go.
Can you
hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, wow. This is cool. Oh, thank you so much. And Heather, what a great presentation. Yeah. I wanted to mention that the site management at this site is consistent with other man-made sites. Because the natural processes are missing, intervention is necessary to maintain the conditions. I'm having a little trouble with the microphone. It's all echoing back. But anyway, I wanted to mention that. And I also wanted to mention Fish and Wildlife Service did sea level rise modeling of all the sites as part of our last 5-year review. We weren't able to use the Cosmos model, which is a more up-to-date modeling technique, but we did do some sea level rise modeling So you could check into that if you wanted to see where this site fell in terms of threats associated with sea level rise. And then lastly, I wanted to ask Heather if offline I could find out where she's getting her decoys, because we're interested in obtaining additional decoys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sandy.
Yeah. So, no, Sandy, I understood that. It just, it seems like there was a freshwater lens that was forming over the site in 2020 with that late season rain we had, and that's not necessarily going to be modeled with the sea level rise, like you getting that freshwater lens on top of the seawater that's below it, and that's where building the site up with more dredge spoils, like from T1 estuary or something like that, might really make sense. And then my thought on the sustainability was, is there any potential way to manage a native plant community on any of these sites, like you're trying to do with Nuttall's lotus, so that we can get multi-species benefit beyond just the birds? That was it, because if we're investing in that management, this would be a good site to try to add some additional taxa to that as well.
Okay. I don't see any other hands up.
No.
So I definitely want to thank Heather and Jennifer, Sarah and Mark for these great presentations. It's really, really nice to see and hear about where the EMP, where that money is going, and the successes we're having out in the community. And it helps inform us as to not only where the money's going and the species that are thriving, but also just kind of that whole picture of that bigger landscape as to what type of threats or what type of opportunities there are out there all over the place that we need to see what we can do about addressing. Anyhow, I think that's pretty much it for our agenda. Our next EMP working group meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, June 8th at 1 p.m. Same time, same channel. We'll see if it's in person or video.
Likely video.
And hopefully we'll have a chair by then. Do we have anything else, Kim, or are we ready to adjourn?
No, I think we're ready to adjourn.
Do we need a motion?
No, you just have to.
I just have to deem it so. Okay.
Time.
At 2:45 p.m. our meeting is adjourned. Thank you everybody for attending. I appreciate all the help and support, and I appreciate all the panelists and presenters today. Hope you all have a great day.
Thank you, everyone,
for doing the presentations. That was great.
Presentations, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.